Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Russell Cahill was a park ranger in Yosemite, Alaska, Washington, D.C., and Hawaii, and his experiences outdoors have been instrumental to his writing. His latest book, Kepa, A Hawaiian in the Wild West, follows its eponymous protagonist up the west coast of 19th century America and his run-ins with the gold rush, the fur trade, formerly enslaved black people, and other phenomena that made the 1800s such a tumultuous time for the states. He's also written a memoir about his time as a park ranger and a historical epic called Kolea, a story of Hawaii and beyond. He sits down with library volunteer Howard Lazzarini to talk about his books and his life as a park ranger and a Hawaiian. Here's their conversation.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Howard Lazzarini, a volunteer here at the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, and we're here today with Russell Cahill, author, former sheriff, park ranger, administrator, environmental activist, and on occasion, I believe, musician?
Well, I play the guitar and ukulele.
Okay. Welcome, Russell, and thank you for being here today with us on the podcast. Now, Russell's written 3 books so far, Tales from the Parks, telling us about his career in the Park Service, and 2 other really interesting fiction books, Kolea and Kepa, an audiobook that I was privileged to record here for WTBBL, that tell stories of Hawaii and beyond. And just to let you know, Russ, this book will be uploaded to the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, so it will gain a national audience in audiobook format. We'll get to those books, but first tell us a little about yourself and your background. You were born in San Francisco and raised in the Bay Area. Your father was Hawaiian. Your mother came from Pilgrim stock?
Yes. My mom's ancestors came over on the Mayflower, and so I had kind of a mixed background. My dad came over in 1919 at 5 years of age when the Hawaiians were in the territory of Hawaii at the time. And there were not good jobs in Hawaii. My grandfather was a marine engineer and the ships kept getting bigger and being stationed in San Francisco. So he moved the family to San Francisco when my dad was 5. And I grew up in the city in what we used to laughingly call a bunch of Hawaiians in the middle of an Italian ghetto.
Where was that in San Francisco?
Well, out in the Mission.
Oh, in the Mission.
At the time, yeah. It's changed a lot.
Okay.
And went through high school, played football successfully, and got a football scholarship to go to Michigan State. I played there for a couple of years and then did my Army service. Came out, had a family, worked nights as a deputy sheriff in San Jose, and then joined the National Park Service after I graduated from college. And the rest is parks, national, state, and local parks.
Well, what inspired you to become a park ranger and go in that direction?
My mom came from a family that frequently went camping at a place called Big Basin State Park in California. And my mom, at age 6, was lost with a 12-year-old girl. The 2 of them walked 12 miles to the coast along a creek and were found in good condition. And we continued after World War II. When my dad came home, we continued going camping every year. And I saw the rangers and thought, what a great job that would be. Mm-hmm. And so it was in the back of my head all the time.
Mm-hmm. And yet you started as a deputy sheriff.
I did. I worked nights as a deputy sheriff in Santa Clara County for 6 years and finished my college, part-time by doing that. And I had 3 children by the time I graduated, so it was nice to have a chance to go to work in the national parks.
Okay. Well, okay, so you have a long career with the national parks, state parks, local parks. What inspired you to get started as a writer, first in tales and then writing fictional stories about Hawaii?
Well, in Hawaii, I'm half Hawaiian, and I was trying to get connected up with my roots. And, everyone was reading the book Roots at the time. And, it was a a good effort, and my children got to spend 4 years there when I was superintendent at Haleakala National Park. So we tried to get immersed in that part of our culture, and I found out a lot about legends and myths of Hawaii, and a lot of them were centered around the national park where I worked at Haleakala. And so this book was sort of a natural. I talked to a lot of people who were involved in ancient studies and so forth, and I decided I wanted to try doing that. So I started writing it and put it away for many years. And then more recently, I took a look at it. My granddaughter showed up one day with a broken windshield and said, "Grandpa, a car knocked a great big rock up and destroyed my windshield." And I said, "You'd better get it fixed." She said, "I don't have any money," which is what grandchildren do. And so I said, okay. She was a good typist. I said, "Type this manuscript for me in Word, and we'll go down and get a new windshield." So I cut a deal with my granddaughter, and that was the start of getting that first book written and then published.
I see. Okay, well, but in Tales, from the parks, you talk about your career in the Park Service and you describe your postings. Could you tell us about those?
Sure. Park rangers at the time, they no longer do, but at the time, we all went to the Grand Canyon for 11 weeks of training, and it was like military basic training on steroids. Excuse me.
It's all right.
We had to learn all kinds of things about the bureaucracy, for number one, how to deal with the federal government, working for the federal government. And then we had to learn firefighting, law enforcement, packing mules, compass courses in the backcountry, and cliff rescue, where we dangled off the side of the Grand Canyon with Stokes litters, and learned how to do all of the climbing, many of the climbing techniques anyway.
It must have been scary.
Well, not really. It's all done with a lot of safety stuff,
Okay.
which is what you end up having to do. And at the end of that 11 weeks, I got assigned to Yosemite, and showed up there right around Christmas. And Yosemite is, I would describe it as nature with the volume turned up. There's an incredible roar of Yosemite Falls, and up in the canyons and Vernal and Nevada and Illilouette Falls. They block out everyday noise that you hear in the valley, where there are sometimes as many as 30,000 people in a 7-square-mile valley. And my recollection was the day I got there, or the night I got there actually, we all were put up in an old building called the Rangers Club, my whole family. And in the morning I walked out, and overnight the snow and the ice had accumulated on the faces of the thousands of feet of cliffs, south-facing cliffs, right next to Yosemite Falls. And when the sun hit it at 6 a.m., sounds of what sounded like cannons going off as the ice broke off. Big sheets of ice broke off and fell down near the bottom of the cliffs. And it was so spectacular and such a moving experience that it kind of set me off. I had to learn to ski. I had to do all the different things that I'd never done before, and spent a lot of time doing firefighting, law enforcement, cliff rescue, all the things that you have to do as a ranger. Also collecting dollar bills from people at the entrance stations. I don't want to knock off the small stuff that you end up doing. So it was a really enlightening experience, and my family loved it, of course.
Yeah. So that was Yosemite, and then after Yosemite, you went to...
Yeah, I got sent to Glacier Bay, and I got sent there because I volunteered. Glacier Bay was headquartered at a very small community, maybe 225 residents, a place called Gustavus, Alaska. And they had a one-room school there for grades 1 through 8. Children above the 8th grade had to take correspondence courses from the University of Nebraska and some other places. And they only had 14 kids, and the state was going to close the school if they didn't have 16. So they put out a note saying, anybody want to work at Glacier Bay who has 2 school-age children? Well, I had 3, and I don't think today you could do that under employment laws and so forth, but at the time it made a lot of sense. And so I got sent to Glacier Bay, and there was a whole other set of things to learn, particularly navigation in really difficult waters. There's 26-foot tide changes, and coming out of 2 75-mile-long fjords and then through a 1-mile channel with reefs. And so it's extremely difficult boating, and I had to learn to do that, had to learn to get up on the ice, spent time on the glaciers. At the time, mining was legal. There were exploratory mine things, and I had to work on those. And we got involved in rescues. The tour boat, a 45-passenger tour boat at one time, took a hole and had to be beached, and we had to get up there with a little fire pump and pump it out and patch it so we could get it back.
How did you patch it?
The captain carved a plug, maybe out of 6x6 piece of wood, and then with a hammer drove it in with some T-shirts or something around it to get. And of course, we took all the people back on the Ranger boats, 6 or 8 at a time, and then he ran it back, with just a couple of Rangers on board, and they had a rescue skiff with them. We were so far from the Coast Guard that, our 26-foot boat that I ran was it as far as, and we spent, we had to go rescue fishermen. We had to go and find a drunk who was shooting at other fishing boats. It was a kind of an exciting job.
Sounds like. Oh, I got to ask you one question. I mean, you built a cabin when you were up there. Do you still have that cabin?
I do, but it was later, actually. It was later. I'll tell you about that. At Glacier Bay, I was there as a district ranger, and then I got a call that said that the one permanent park ranger at Katmai National Park had gotten a bleeding ulcer and was being evacuated, and to get on the plane by myself and go up there. And Katmai is a park that's about 3 times the size of Rhode Island. It has 17 active volcanoes and hundreds of big bears, the ones you see on the TV ads standing on that little waterfall catching the fish. And it gets very few visitors, but it's an interesting place. And I was the only park ranger, along with 4 college students who were brought up there for the summer to do the ranger and the naturalist work. So I got on the plane and went to one of the most remote places I've ever been. It was a place with enormous bears, the biggest I've ever seen. They were relatively silent. We had to use one single restroom and shower for the cabins that were there, little one-room cabins. And on my way to the John in the dark, I could feel the bear walking by me, right next to me. I could get his presence as it passed me and the odor, but I couldn't see it, and very little could I hear it. About the only noises they make with a human is to make a big huff just before they get nasty. And fortunately, I didn't have to run into that, and I kept my seasonal rangers from being eaten by the wildlife for the summer.
Good job.
A successful, yeah.
And then, if I recall, you then were asked to go to Haleakala?
No, that's when they sent me to Washington, D.C. for a year.
Oh, D.C., yeah.
Yeah, I came
back. That
was
a surprise. It must have been a surprise.
Well, I had run into the Undersecretary of Interior, Russell Train. He had been a federal judge that President Nixon had appointed. Well, he was this Deputy Secretary of Interior, and he came up to visit Katmai. And then a journalist who had just won a Pulitzer Prize for his book, it turned into a book, his series of articles called Will Success Spoil the National Parks? And both of them wanted to talk to me about what was the potential danger of blowing up nuclear weapons underneath Amchitka Island out on the Aleutian Chain, because it's in the big earthquake zone that runs all the way through the Aleutian Chains and down the coast, the volcanoes. And I had been talking to a lot of geologists, so I basically had a lot of evening talks with those 2 fellows. And they turned out to be 2 of the 3 first appointees to the President's Council on Environmental Quality when Earth Day was there and the National Environmental Policy Act was passed. Nixon signed all these bills. And so they called up and said, we need some people for a year because we have no budget. Would you come back? Because I knew I was a biologist as well. And so I got on the plane, went back, and later my family joined me. I spent a year, and they put me to work studying the effects of dumping of garbage and nuclear pressure vessels and just about everything else in the ocean for disposal. And with a couple of interns, we put out a report, and it succeeded. We got a couple of the legal interns there wrote a bill which went through the Congress pretty fast and was signed by the president. So I had a pretty interesting year. Mm-hmm. And after that, the Secretary of Interior, Wally Hickel, got fired by the president. There was all this dispute among cabinet members about the Vietnam War and so forth. And so there were a lot of firings going on. Mm-hmm. And the National Park Director realized that he was going to be next. So he pulled all of those he had loaned out to other agencies in and said, do you want to come back? And he sent me to Hawaii, which wasn't bad.
So just before you head there, so it sounds like you were instrumental in creating some of the first environmental legislation in the United States. Is that accurate?
Well, the first after the 70s, yeah. There were things before that, of course, back in history. But yeah, and it was before the EPA really got going. We were doing a lot of other stuff while I was back there, too, examining and the first environmental impact statements that were filed on, for instance, pulp mill in Alaska and all kinds of other things that were on the books. So it was pretty interesting, and I was a very low-level federal employee and sometimes chairing committees that they had no idea who I was, and I was chairing committees where some of my bosses were on the committee.
Well, thank you very much for that work. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So then you went to Haleakala.
Then I went to Haleakala for 4 years, and it was a wonderful experience. It's a relatively silent park. It's a great volcano at rest since I think the 1600s, and basic sounds I can remember from Haleakala are the creaking of the saddles and the packs on the mule trains that we used to go into the backcountry and supply stuff. But I thought I'd mention something interesting because of the nature of this podcast. The lava tubes that are around those volcanoes are formed by a deep creek. And when the lava flows down the creek, the outside of the lava flow solidifies before the inside. And so the hot lava inside continues to flow, and it leaves a cave, a tube of lava. Well, there was one place that had 3 of those stacked on top of one another, and they hadn't collapsed. And we had arranged ladders so you could go down from the surface to the first, from the first to the second, and from the second to the third. And when you got into the third, you were the closest thing to being totally blind that you could possibly be. There was zero light, and I've never experienced that in my life. People don't realize how much light there is. I mean, even in the second lava tube, you could get a little bit of tinkling of light coming in from the stars at night and stuff. So we took school children down in there, and we had to have them hold hands, and then we would turn out the lights and have them experience total darkness. And it's a very interesting experience for kids. They had to hold hands, and it would make them quite nervous, but it was a good experience, and they could experience how it would be to have just nothing but touch and what you could hear.
Right.
The park also had a coastal area, which was, a historical area where Hawaiians had taro patches, and some of those were being restored while I was there, and waterfalls and wonderful flowers and what you could smell, and the jasmine type flowers and all of those things. It's a remarkable place, and I hope people get a chance to visit it.
Well, what was it like being the first person, I think you said in your book, of Hawaiian descent to be appointed the superintendent of Haleakala?
It was different. I'm pretty easy with these things. I mean, people can say all they want, but it doesn't matter. If you have the stick in your hand, you have the stick in your hand. So, well, the first day I was there, the chief ranger came out smoking a cigarette and said, "Superintendents, they come and they go." So it was not a good start between me and the chief ranger.
Did it improve after that?
No, it didn't.
It never did.
No, not for 4 years. And that's, he told me once, "You should be giving me a good recommendation so you can get rid of me." And I said, "That's not the way it works." So anyway, there's that, and then others saying, just because you have Hawaiian blood doesn't mean blah blah blah, and the kinds of things you hear when you're the first one,
right?
Right. But then we started hiring some Hawaiians into some of the other jobs, and most of my crew were local people. A lot of them descended from plantation workers, Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese, and Hawaiians, and pretty much mixed population of people, and they were wonderful. And you pointed out something in the book you wanted me to read.
Would you please read that one paragraph? I think it really kind of embodies Hawaii.
Sure. This is on page 182 of Tales from the Parks. Those park employees' potluck suppers were international culinary events. Japanese-American employees brought excellent sushi. Some of the wranglers brought spicy, soft, jerked goat meat that they heated over charcoal. Poi and local fruits were brought by Hawaiians, and haole, seasonal employees, would bring huge tubs of Kentucky Fried Chicken. I even discovered that the work crew once hired a temporary employee of Spanish origin because his mom made the best blood sausage on Maui. The suppers were usually topped off with Adele Favela's cake. With that cake, filled with cream and gelled fruit fillings, you practically needed to have your cardiologist's phone number readily available if you decided to have dessert. And then when the food was gone, it was time for beer, coffee, music, some hula, and just a general good time. When I hear people complain about immigrant culture watering down America, I know that person has never been to rural Hawaiian potlucks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Well, you've kind of described Yosemite to someone, maybe someone who's visually impaired. You've described Haleakala. How about Glacier Bay? What would be the things that, I mean, you have to be pretty careful at Glacier Bay. You don't want to run into a bear or something like that. But
well, most of Glacier Bay's work takes place on boats because that's what it is. It's, an enormous range, 15,300-foot mountain right on the border with Canada, and a number of other mountains that are 12, 13, 14,000 feet, picking up huge amounts of snow and pushing them into these giant glaciers. And the glaciers are moving slowly, but they're moving. Mm-hmm. And periodically, when they get to the salt water, they push off an iceberg. And it comes with an enormous cracking sound and then an explosive sound as the ice hits the water, sometimes from 300 feet up. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable. Someone once called it white thunder. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would think about is the whales. The fjords are filled with humpbacks, minkies, and orcas that show up there in the summer to feed. The humpbacks go to Hawaii and hang out off Lahaina, and they're not eating when they're in Hawaii, mm-hmm. but they get all their food when they get north, and they're just going through these huge amounts of microscopic animals and plants that they take in and filter. And they get pretty frisky. Once in a while, they will leap almost completely out of the water, make huge splashes. And they sound like an explosion. And also, I would be camping along the shore there at times and hear cracks that sounded like a cannon going off. And basically, it was the whale either slapping its tail or its pectoral fin, some of which are like 15 feet long and huge. Mm-hmm. They will whack the water so hard it makes a sound. But the most remarkable one I recall was at one time I was camped and I climbed up on a bluff to get a view on a very, very calm day. And from miles away, I heard the sound of a whale spouting, and it had some kind of occlusion in the hole, which made it have a note, and it was an A. And each time...
Well, you have a good ear then, don't you?
Each time it breathed, it would put out this A note. And I listened to that thing for 15 or 20 minutes, almost like a miracle. The other thing you hear there a lot is you could be on flat water, as if you were on a lake or a pond somewhere here in King County, but the water's moving fast. You don't realize it. You're just sitting on fast-moving water, and then it hits a reef, and it rises up and dives under the ambient water, and it makes a sound like the rushing Colorado River. I actually once was in a kayak, and we flipped it in one of those and had to rescue ourselves. But it makes an incredibly sound. It makes an incredible sound that gets down into your bones when you hear it.
It sounds like. Well, going back to your books here, so you wrote Kolea, which you subtitled a story of Hawaii and beyond. What inspired you to write that particular book?
The legends in Hawaii.
And could you describe the book? I mean,
the book is a book about coming of age in Hawaii by young people, one of whom is a child of a king, but he's a bastard child, and he's being hidden. He's being hidden by a sort of spiritual hula dancer who, at the time, hula dancers were almost like priests in a way. They had access to the mythical magic and these different things. She is paired up with a blind warrior who has had his eyes put out during a battle where he lost. And they raise this child. He becomes the main character of the book, and at one time is required to escape. And he and his young friends build a big double-hulled canoe and take off and sail it to Alaska and run into the places that I knew in Alaska, and then down the coast through Haida Gwaii and the Northwest, and on down the coast to Baja California and back to Hawaii. And this tale is just adventures along the way, meeting up with the Native Americans and the Canadian original people. And I just had a good time with it, basically telling some of the stories around the geography that I knew. My two novels both required a lot of good geography, and that's really where I spent quite a bit of my time, was to try to get those things right. Anyway, that's where that book came from, and I just enjoyed writing it.
Right.
The Tales from the Parks came from a cocktail party where my wife heard me telling a story and got me aside and said, "You'd better start writing these things down because you said that different last time you told it." And so I wrote that book, and at the end it says, if you know some of these things and know them in a different manner, write your own book.
Okay.
And then the last book I got into.
Kepa is the book that I recorded. So
yeah,
and that's available through the library here. So
yes, that's a historical novel, and I got serious about that one. The first two, were early attempts. Kepa I had to work hard on because it's a historical novel, and I had to get the dates and the places and the people who are real in it, some of the actual characters of real life in it, to weave around the fictional characters. And it involves how Hawaiians got to the West Coast. At one time, there were more Hawaiians on the West Coast than there were Americans prior to the gold rush in California. And that was true on up into Canada as well. And the story is of a person who comes ashore in California early on, where some of the first writing about Hawaiians took place by Richard Henry Dana in his early book, 2 years before the mast. He got me started on this, actually. And then goes on up through California and Oregon and Washington, and with adventures along the way, and eventually into British Columbia. And one of the reasons I wanted to tell these stories was because here in the Northwest, there's a lot of evidence of all the Hawaiians who lived there. The town of Kalama is named after a Hawaiian. A lot of the people who live who are Nisqually Indians are named Kalama and are descended from John Kalama. Mm-hmm. But Hawaiians had farms, they built forts, they were boatmen, they were the first pilots on the Columbia River Bar, and they did all these things with the Hudson's Bay Company. And when the territory started, the United States made the Oregon Territory, the Hawaiians were pushed north along with the Hudson's Bay Company because there was a conflict between them and the new Americans. And also there was racism. The first congressional delegate in the Oregon Territory was a guy named Thurston, who Thurston County is named after. And the first piece of legislation he got the Congress to do was to disenfranchise Hawaiians. Blacks were already disenfranchised, and Hawaiians and natives didn't have the vote either. So Hawaiians couldn't vote. They couldn't own land under the Homestead Act, and the farms they'd had here for 30 years or so, which were providing a lot of the food to the Hudson's Bay Company, those farms were taken over in many cases by Americans who could file homesteads on them and just take over, which caused the Hawaiians to move north to the San Juan Islands. And then when that turned into the United States, they moved north into the Gulf, into what they call the Sunshine Coast and British Columbia, and lots of them in Victoria, Vancouver, and Lander.
In Kepa, you talk about the interaction between Native Americans in California at that time and the Hawaiians. Is that also based on fact?
Yes, it is. One very interesting thing that's never really been proven, but it's pretty interesting, is the Chumash tribe in Southern California around San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara. Their canoes are put together like Hawaiian canoes, not as outriggers, but as single hull canoes. They built them where they sewed the sides, the gunnels onto them. A piece maybe 6 or 8 inches tall with holes in it was sewn onto the lower part, just the way the Hawaiians do. And it's the only North American Indian group that has canoes like that.
Oh,
and some Hawaiians believe that Hawaiians got there at some point. So I wanted to kind of weave that into there. And also, all those people, 3,000 Hawaiians, for instance, worked for the Hudson's Bay Company over time, but they were all men. Mm-hmm. And so they were young men. They came here. The white people wouldn't marry them, so they married Native Americans. And so all up and down the coast, I've met Native American people who some have Hawaiian names, and many of them have Hawaiian ancestors. And it made me want to weave that into the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting part of the book. Well, thank you very much for that. You have any other books in the works right now?
I have 7 short stories that I've written, and I'm going through the editor's marks right now, where you either accept or say no to the marks that they put in there.
Right.
And unfortunately, the writer that I am, there are a lot of marks. And so I have about 4 of them done now. I figure I've got about another 3 months to go through and get it right. And then I will either publish them online individually, because you can do that now on Kindle, or I might put them into a book. The issue with putting them into a book is I don't have a publisher, and so I have to do it myself, and then you end up having to sell the books yourself, which at my age, I don't know.
I hear you. Given your background, Russell, with the parks and administration in the parks, as well as being a ranger and whatever, given our current budgetary and staff cuts at both the national and state parks, what can we do as American citizens to keep our parks open and vibrant?
That actually is a tough question, because the last thing I want to do is to tell people they should volunteer to fill in for all these poor people that got hired from necessary jobs. And yet, volunteers do a lot of the work already in the national parks. So that's really a good thing to do, to volunteer. But it's really a sensitive thing when you realize that people who were doing needed jobs were just let go for no good reason. And here's the thing. The National Park Service budget is about $3.6 billion. The income from the visits to the national park in the most recent year is $21.7 billion. If that isn't a bargain, and if that isn't a contribution...
So the parks pay for themselves.
Well, not only that, but a lot of that money is coming in from overseas. So it's money coming in outside of all this discussion about tariffs and everything else. It's money that has been coming in for years. I mean, in the middle of the most remote place in Alaska where I work, a big plane load, well, big meaning like 16 passengers in a big seaplane, showed up on the beach with all these Italians, hardly any English spoken, and all well-dressed, got off to stay in these really rustic quarters. So you know, it's just a terrible thing to do to the economy and to the people that got laid off. There's no reason those people got laid off. The parks are so successful, 340 million or something like that people visit them in a year. And I think part of it may have to do with the fact that the historical parks that have been set aside under the few previous administrations are not liked by the current administration for one reason or another. All this business about the DEI and so forth. And so I think that's part of what's going on here. But people should pay attention to that. And actually, if they could, I would tell them to write their congressman, call their congressman or congresswoman, in my case, and talk to them about the fact that it's really a good deal for the United States, and it's a really bad deal to have them closing the visitor centers and discouraging people from going to what has been described as America's best idea.
Well, thank you so much, Russell, for joining us this morning here. And we look forward to seeing these new short stories, and maybe in the form of a book, and because we really so much enjoy your work. And thank you very much for coming.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate the chance to do this. Thanks, Howard.
Russell Cahill currently has 3 books in process at the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. Kepa, a Hawaiian in the Wild West, will be available as an audiobook with the class ID DBC 31132. Tales of the Park, My Adventures as a Park Ranger, will be available as an audiobook with the class ID DBC 32906. And Kolea, A Story of Hawaii and Beyond, will be available as an audiobook with the class ID DBC 32905. We'll let you know in a later episode when these are available. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org or call us Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.